Hello, I'm Ellen Binns, coming today from Wheaton, Illinois, in the USA. Welcome to Impact, a podcast about how we can each bring about real change in the world and getting practical in making that happen.
And hello, I'm Clive Johnson, coming today from Leigh-on-Sea in the UK. A special welcome if you're listening for the first time, and a big thank you to our new subscribers. Each week, we look at one aspect of how we can connect our hearts to offer healing for others with our collective intention, prayers, and meditation, and go behind the headlines of a critical happening in our world that needs our attention right now. In today's episode, we take one of these regular deep dives to more fully understand and tune in with something many of us may know only a little about, and see where we might home in with our prayers and intentions. And as we record, it's Wednesday, 18th December, 2024. This week, we try to get a handle on a news story that has shocked many in the West in recent weeks, not to mention ordinary civilians in a country where an extraordinary sequence of events has unfolded. That is, South Korea. As always, we'll seek to understand where the motivations and dynamics may be heading, and specifically, where we might will for the best outcome through our intentions and prayers. On 3rd December, South Korean President Yoon Suk-Yeol declared emergency martial law in an unannounced televised address. A rapid series of events unfolded following his declaration, which was swiftly condemned as unconstitutional by South Korean politicians, and which saw thousands of citizens take to the streets in peaceful protests. Lawmakers convened an emergency session of the National Assembly, overcoming military barriers to enter the chamber, where they voted unanimously to lift the martial law. Soon afterward, Yoon announced he would reverse his decision and withdraw troops. The opposition Democratic Party later announced it would begin impeachment proceedings against the president if he did not step down. The chair of his own party at the time also called for his removal, but this wasn't the position taken by Yoon's Conservative Party, and an initial impeachment attempt failed when it was put to the vote.
Second appeal was submitted by opposition parties to the National Assembly last week, calling for Yoon's impeachment, which succeeded, and it was heard last Saturday. Ahead of the impeachment hearing, a Gallup Korea survey found that 75% of people support an impeachment of Yoon. Earlier in a televised address, Yoon had accused the opposition parties of paralyzing national politics. The country's police chief told investigators that President Yoon called him 6 times to demand the arrest of lawmakers during the short-lived declaration of martial law. National Police Agency Commissioner General Cho Yi-ho was subsequently accused of insurrection and was ordered to be detained by his own officers. This rapid sequence of events has been cited as evidence of the resilience of South Korea's democratic institutions. However, the incident has wider implications, as we'll see.
Yeah, this arrest of the police chief was something that didn't really make the news in any big way in the UK, certainly. But it seemed to me to be very concerning, if it's true, if it's upheld, really sort of indicating that some pretty authoritarian control was being instituted at that time. So
was it? I'm a little bit confused about all this. I guess because we can't really define the motivation for all of this clearly. The police chief was working with Yoon or was against Yoon?
I don't know, actually.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, he was independent. He was doing his job, but Yoon called him to make arrests. So it was an attempt at interference, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although it may well be within the presidential power, I don't know, but still seems to be very anti-democratic if
yes,
that was true. And then subsequently, of course, the police chief, presumably refused, was arrested himself. So quite a potentially draconian matter.
Yeah.
Maybe the arrest was justified because he disobeyed an order, or,
Yes, that's what it sounds like.
He may well have fallen foul of the law, as it were, but ethically, there certainly seem to be questions to be answered there. So what triggered the call for martial law in South Korea this month? Yoon's declaration had been triggered by several factors. Firstly, political. He had accused the opposition party of paralyzing the government by controlling parliament and engaging in anti-state activities. It also cited the need to protect the country from North Korean communist forces, although didn't specify any particular threats. And the opposition had rejected a proposed government budget and cut key budgets essential to the nation's core functions. They had also initiated impeachment proceedings against high-ranking prosecutors. So a very fractious government, or parliament, I should say. Yoon characterized these actions as being what he called evidence of anti-state conduct intended to provoke insurrection. However, as we have said, the National Assembly unanimously disagreed, quickly passing a resolution demanding the lifting of the martial law in just 6 hours after its implementation. We remember that happening just a couple of weeks ago, I think, and really holding our breath to see what was going to unfold. But it was a remarkably quick resolution.
Yeah, it was. It was impressive.
Yeah. And they defied security around the parliament to get in, to actually carry out that debate and vote.
So is this incident a one-off or especially unusual in the country's history? The imposition of martial law in the country is unusual in its recent history, but not unprecedented looking over its longer history. Indeed, South Korea has been under martial law several times since its founding as a nation in 1948, including to suppress communist threats during the Korean War, that was 1950 to 1953. And under authoritarian leaders like Park Chung-hee during the 1960s and 70s, who used it as a means to maintain power and suppress dissent. However, the last significant instance before this week was back in 1980 under Chun Doo-hwan, which led to the Gwangju Uprising, a mass protest in the city of Gwangju against the military dictatorship of Chun Doo-hwan. The country transitioned to democracy in 1987. Since then, martial law had not been used until President Yoon's declaration this month.
So why might this incident be of concern for civilians in the country and indeed in other countries? Well, it's obviously raised concerns for civilians within the country, but also internationally. Martial law, as we probably know, typically involves restricting fundamental rights, including freedom of speech, assembly, and movement. The fact that individual civil liberties can be so suddenly taken away from them is alarming for South Korean citizens. Quite literally, in a moment, everything can change. And I guess that possibly not exactly the same, but something that we can, most of us, relate to, which is fairly similar in this sort of sudden change, are the restrictions that many of us lived under during lockdown with the COVID pandemic. Any potential shift from civilian to military authority is concerning for maintaining democratic norms, as in such circumstances, the military are granted extraordinary powers to detain people without charge, and they're also able to censor the media. They are usually given the power to suppress any dissenters with brutal force.
Not a good thing.
No, absolutely. Especially in a country which I think many of us regard as being kind of a beacon of democracy in Southeast Asia. Really.
Right. So even though it was short-lived, President Yoon's decision to declare martial law indicates deep political tensions and potential instability in the country's government. As one of Asia's biggest economies, political turmoil in South Korea could have far-reaching economic consequences, both within the region and globally. It's not yet clear what the impacts of this incident may be on South Korea's relationships with allies, especially the U.S., where the Biden government took a particularly cautious response to what likely may have become a strained and tense situation. Worryingly, the use of martial law to address political disagreements appears to set a dangerous precedent for resolving political differences. Even in what some see as a model democracy, it demonstrates the potential for authoritarian leadership to exert power at will. While this particular incident was quickly overturned, its imposition has left lingering questions about the state of South Korean democracy and the potential for future political crisis, which are concerns for both citizens within South Korea itself and for the international community.
I think it brings home possibly the power that presidents and prime ministers often do have. I know in the UK, it's quite surprising how much power the British prime minister has. The US president, has control over the nuclear weapons, don't they? And the commander-in-chief of the military.
Yes.
And this is the case in many, many democracies. So what is the instant significance in relation to South Korea's relationship with North Korea? The incident highlights South Korea's ongoing tense relationship with the North. Yoon had cited a threat from North Korean communist forces as a justification for declaring martial law, potentially escalating tensions between the two countries. Meanwhile, the martial law declaration handed North Korea a significant propaganda victory, allowing them to exploit the situation and undermine South Korea's democratic image. The short-lived declaration may be interpreted by North Korea as a sign of weakness in the South, potentially encouraging more aggressive behavior towards its southern neighbor. Indeed, some analysts have warned that the political turmoil in South Korea could lead to a miscalculation by North Korea, potentially resulting in provocative and dangerous actions. That hopefully will not happen. Then there's obviously an extreme, but it's a valid concern. So in several ways, the event underscores the complex interplay between domestic politics and inter-Korean relations, potentially influencing the delicate balance of power on the Korean, and peace indeed, on the Korean peninsula. Only time will tell whether this incident is quickly dismissed as a unique, erratic decision of one president.
I can't wait for this to unfold and get more details.
No.
So what we do know, what happens now that President Yoon has been impeached? Following the impeachment of President Yoon, his presidential authority was immediately suspended, and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo assumed the role of acting president. The impeachment case is being sent to the Constitutional Court for review, the court having up to 180 days to reach a decision on whether to uphold or dismiss the impeachment. If the court upholds the impeachment, Yoon will be permanently removed from office. Otherwise, he will be reinstated as president and return to his official duties. In the former case, a presidential election must be held within 60 days to select a new leader. Throughout this process, South Korea is likely to experience continued political uncertainty and potential public demonstrations as the nation awaits the court's decision and a potential election within the coming months. The prospect for calm being sustained during this constitutional crisis is uncertain. Large-scale protests both for and against Yoon have been taking place, with hundreds of thousands of people gathering in Seoul. The impeachment has exposed deep divisions within the ruling People Power Party, which could lead to further political fragmentation and instability. The party now faces a critical decision on whether to distance itself from Yoon or risk political irrelevance. This is the third time a Korean president has faced impeachment proceedings since the country became a democracy in 1987. The previous case of successful impeachment of Park Geun-hye in 2017 led to significant political upheaval. There's no guarantee that this will be avoided this time around.
Potentially it's going to be quite prolonged, isn't it? If there's this long period the court has to decide, and then that period before an election, it could be a substantial part of, well, certainly the first half of the new year.
So it's interesting. They don't have a vice president like we do, like a person who could step up if somebody gets impeached, or they have to go to the prime minister.
Yes, it seems that's the way. And I was wondering about how the Constitution operates there. I really haven't looked into this, but what kind of checks and balances there are, around the budget. I mean, it sounds as though that was one of the reasons he took this control, was that the opposition was standing against spending plans that he had, limiting the budget. So I imagine that there's a similar separation between approval of budgets and presidential power that would be in the US, for example. But I really don't know anything about about the Constitution there. Yeah, interesting. So what are the implications of the incident for South Korean democracy and stability moving forward? Now, encouragingly, we think the swift rejection of martial law by both the National Assembly and the public does seem to demonstrate the strength of South Korea's democratic institutions, underscoring the country's commitment to civilian governance and its ability to resist authoritarian tendencies. However, the incident has deepened political divisions. The heightened political tension is likely to persist, potentially affecting governance and policymaking in the coming months. As we say, it could go on for quite some months yet. Many older South Koreans will have been reminded of the country's authoritarian past, potentially eroding public trust in the government. This could lead to a desire for increased scrutiny of executive actions and a more engaged civil society.
The incident may also threaten to tarnish South Korea's image as a stable democracy in the region, having implications for its international relationships and standing in this geopolitically sensitive area, as well as leading to economic uncertainty. While there's been no immediate impact on the country's world-leading industries like petrochemicals, car manufacture, and electronics, Samsung, LG Electronics, Hyundai, and Kia are among its well-known brands. Prolonged political turmoil could affect investor confidence and economic growth. For the National Assembly, the event is likely to prompt a reassessment of the constitutional provisions regarding martial law and executive powers, potentially leading to reforms to prevent similar incidences in the future. While the immediate crisis is past, the longer-term implications of this event are likely to continue to shape South Korean politics and society, testing the resilience of its democratic system and potentially leading to significant changes in its political landscape. We'll be watching what happens very closely and holding the country and its people in our intention and prayers.
Yeah. This is going to run, isn't it? In the early
Yeah.
And indeed, following, I guess, the election potential, if Yoon is not returned to power, potentially a new president coming into position as well. So for now, where might we hone in with our intentions and prayers? Well, we might will for a movement of compassion for Yoon himself, the interim president, Han Duck-soo, and future leaders to recognize the importance of democracy and not use martial law as a means for consolidating power or crushing political dissent. We might ask for wisdom for the members of South Korea's Constitutional Court in determining whether or not to uphold President Yoon's impeachment, and also wisdom for international players in their approach towards lobbying and support for the incumbent and any future president. A readiness to see this incident perhaps as being unusual, quickly contained, and not indicating a return to authoritarian leadership and instability in the country. Concerns that might create greater tension in the region. Also, we might will for movement among journalists in the country to more strongly scrutinize government actions and promote a mature, meaningful engagement in the political discourse in civil society, and also for wisdom for the National Assembly in assessing the need for reviewing constitutional provisions regarding martial law and the executive powers of the president. So this point we were talking about earlier, really seeing if the Constitution, as it were, is still fit for purpose.
So our suggested intention focus for this week, following the shock declaration of martial law in South Korea, we suggest holding as our main intention, we will that there will be a rapid restoration of calm, normality, and assurances of political stability in South Korea following the short-lived declaration of martial law by President Yoon and his subsequent impeachment. Please join us in holding this intention.
That about wraps it up for this week. Remember, you can connect with us in the Facebook group and for live intention holding in my daily Insight Timer offerings, and with Ellen in the Labyrinth Activist Network's Zoom calls. Details of how to hook up with these are in our show notes. Look out too for our next special topic episode, which we'll be releasing in the next few days. Thank you for listening and for sharing with us in Holding Intentions. We look forward to connecting again next time. And in the meantime, thank you, go well, stay safe.
And remember, we're more powerful together.
Impact is presented by Ellen Binns and Clive Johnson and produced by Impact Productions. Our theme music is by Chris Collins and our logo artwork is by Auto Classic. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible or your favorite podcast provider. We're a non-commercial podcast dedicated to people of any faith tradition or none who yearn for healing in our troubled world. Please pass on the word so others may join us in making an impact. Thank you for listening.